Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favourite Standalones fantasy edition. So I'll have another video on my favourite Standalones which are not fantasy, but today is all about fantasy. So to start us off, just diving straight in there, the first book I would like to talk about is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So I read this in 2020 and I fell in love. And in this book you're following a main character, Addie LaRue, and she is originally from the 1700s in France, and she's not very happy with her life. She's feeling as though she's forced into an arranged marriage, and to get out of this she just wants to have her own identity and make her own choices in life and not feel restricted by society. And so she makes a deal with the darkness, but the consequence of this deal is that no one remembers her. So she ends up living forever. She's immortal, but nobody remembers her. So as soon as she leaves their presence, they forget who she is. You could just close the door and she'll be forgotten. And so she is trying to come to terms throughout her life of who she is and what her identity is, and if she has a purpose in life, if no one can remember her, and how she can leave a mark on the world when she can't physically leave a mark, because everything that she does just gets erased. And I loved this book so much. It was so emotional. The writing was just exquisite. It was so beautifully written, and it's not like any other V. Schwab book that I have ever read before, and I loved it so much. It was a favourite of the year for me, so it's one of the best standalones I have ever read. Another 2020 favourite standalone was the Stylus C by Erin Morgenstern, and another really beautifully written book. And this book you're following a main character, Zachary, and at the beginning of the book he discovers a book in his university library, and it's filled with short stories. And then he gets to one short story, and that is about it's a moment from his life, and he's like, well, how is my life in this book? And so you're following Zachary as he is trying to figure this out, and the story is interspersed with the stories from the book. And so you're following it, and you're going to see how it all connects together. And it's a very weird story that it's very setting driven. There's this point in the book where you're in this underground magical library, and it's just stunning. And the way it's written it's very it's weaving together lots of different plots, and you're not quite sure how it's all going to come together, but it does. But it when you're reading it, you're like, I'm not quite sure how it's all going to work out. But I think this book is very hit and miss with people. You're either going to absolutely love it or absolutely going to hate it. I fell on the side of loving it, and I really enjoyed it, and completely would recommend this, especially if you like slightly weird, whimsical writing with not too much plot. Speaking of Erin Morgenstern, the Night Circus by her is another favourite standalone of mine. That book is, again, absolutely, it's the way Erin Morgenstern's writing really works for me. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but it really works for me. And that is, you're following two magicians at a circus, and they're challenged to be the best magician, and so they're creating extravagant acts and extravagant tents, and it's like a competition between them, but is it? I again loved that story, and I will read everything that Erin Morgenstern ever writes, even though I know I'll probably be waiting like another 10 years for her next book, but I love her. I'll just do the 2021's The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I was so surprised by how much I loved this story. I read The Humans by Matt Haig and it was fine. I wasn't like overly obsessed with it, but I really enjoyed The Midnight Library. You're following a main character, Nora, and she's very upset with her life. She's not upset, she's just not enjoying where she is in her life. And so at the beginning of the book she commits suicide, so it does have major trigger warnings for that. And at the moment between life and death, she ends up in this place called the Midnight Library. And in this place the books upon the shelves are variations of your life as though you made different choices. So she is examining her regrets in life and seeing what she could have done differently, and if she would be satisfied with that life, and if she would be happy with it. So, and she's going through and just experiencing each different life and seeing, oh, if I made this choice, what would my life look like? Would I be happy? Or is my life that I currently have better suited to me? And it's just an examination of who we are as people, and looking at our choices and going, okay, well, I could have made that choice, but would I be who I am today if I had made that choice? And would I be satisfied? And have I actually made the best choices for me and who I am as a person? Because that's not necessarily me, that choice. That choice isn't who I naturally would be. But I really love this. I love the messages in it. I really spoke to me. And I think if you have ever struggled with depression, anxiety, then this would really speak to you, although you should go in the right headspace, because that first 50 pages are a bit of a challenge to grasp. Not grasp, but like get through if you have had those struggles. Another favourite standalone is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. So I have always loved the movie. The film is just so fun, but the book is just as good. And I'd say that the film is very loyal to the book, and it's a really fun story. Neil Gaiman's short stories, all the ones that I've read Coraline, Stardust and The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and they're all very fun short stories. If you've seen Stardust the film, it's so fun and like a classic. You're following this main guy who agrees to cross over the wall which sort of separates the human world and the magical world in the search for a fallen star, and it goes from there. And it's filled with like all the classic fantasy tropes. Yeah, you have warring brothers who are after the crown, you have flying pirate ships. It's such a fun story. I really recommend the movie and the book, and comparing the two, like it's a very, very fun story. I then have The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So I lent this book out to a friend, and she did give it back to me, but she gave it back to me when I was at work and I didn't have the space to bring it home with me, and now I can't go into work to pick it up. So I just have the cover, and I know that the book is sat in my desk drawers. This is like an epic. It's a very long standalone by Samantha Shannon, and it's just a very, very epic story. So in this world, there's sort of two sides to the world. There's the east and the west. And on the east, dragons are like revered, and they're, I guess, a part of society, and people want to be dragon riders, and they're like praised. And then on the west side, dragons are feared, and they're evil, and they're scary. And people don't really cross between the two sides of the world. They're very separate. And you're following characters on both sides of the world as they come to confront like the big evil. And in this world, the big evil is a dragon which is asleep. It's all going to come together, and all these characters are going to like come together as the story goes on. It is very, very epic. On the west, there's like this matriarchal society, which is so cool, and like the struggles of that, and very much a multi-perspective story with so many characters. One of the characters is like an outsider of the court, and she's the lady in waiting, and she's loyal to this hidden society of mages, and I really enjoyed it. If you're after, although it's like really big, it's like an 800-page book, and it is a little bit intimidating when you look at that size. If you think about it, it is just one book. Like a trilogy would be longer than this, so sort of just see it as like a trilogy in one. And I found it really readable. Like it didn't take me that long to read, considering its size. This is like a favourite from my childhood, A Book of 1,000 Days by Shannon Hale, and I loved Shannon Hale growing up. I read her Goose Girl series and this book, The Book of 1,000 Days, and they're just so fun. They're very like classic fantasies. I reread it so many times. It just reminds me of my childhood, and you're following, I guess, this princess has been put into a tower with her lady's maid, and it's because of, I don't know, I can't remember what she did. She rebelled against her father, and so her father's like, right, you're in there, and you're in there for, I don't know if it was a year or a few years, and it had like a supply of food, and there were guards surrounding it, so if they had any issues, then things could be shipped into them. And so you're following them in this tower, and they can never leave it, and until one day they realise that the guards have all been killed, so something's gone on outside, and their food is running out. And then one day a prince appears. He starts talking to the women in the tower, and he learns that one of them is like a princess, but he's actually talking to the lady's maid. I loved it growing up. I don't know what it would be like if I reread it. I've reread it quite a few times, but I haven't reread it as an adult, like in the past few years. But it was so fun, and it's very classic. Yeah, I'll just describe it as like a classic YA fantasy, and I loved it. So I would strongly recommend it. So if you want something like fun to read. Anything by Margaret Rogerson. So I have read both An Enchantment of Ravens and Sorcery of Thorns. I'd say Sorcery of Thorns is my favourite between the two. I've enjoyed both of these. I know that some people like one and not the other, but for me, I really enjoyed them both. So speaking of Sorcery of Thorns, because this one is my favourite, this, you're following a main character who is raised in this magical library, and in this world, books have power. So you have some books which are just open for everyone to read, and some books which, the ones that are kept in this library, they have like their own persona. They just speak and live and breathe magic, and some of them are, because of the words in them, they're evil, so they need to be locked up and chained. And in this world, magic is, at least for the librarians, is seen as evil and bad and corrupt. And at the beginning of the book, one of the like classified books escapes, and so she is trying to contain it, and she ends up like, they blame her for all these issues, and so she gets expelled from the library and ends up with working alongside a magician. And so she learns like what her preconceptions were about them and whether they've changed, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the setting. I mean, magical libraries is like, it's one of the settings that I just love to pieces, so that completely worked for me. Yeah, I'd completely recommend both of these if you want a fantasy standalone, because they're both so fun. Another favourite standalone of mine is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Naomi Novik has written a few sets. She's written both Uprooted and Spinning Silver. Spinning Silver I liked, but Uprooted was an absolute favourite for me, and it's set in this village which is right next to a forest, and the forest has its own persona. It is like a person, even though it is just a forest, and it's seen as evil. And you have this warlock called the Dragon, and he is tasked with keeping this forest at bay and making sure that the evil does not spread outside of the forest. And so at the beginning of the book, he is set to choose a woman from the town to aid him and work in his tower for the next, I think it was a year, maybe it was a couple of years. So every year or so, he picks a different woman to work in the tower with him and like just tidy up after him, and so that he can do his job of keeping the forest at bay. And so they're sort of a tribute to him. At the beginning of the book, the women are all in line to be picked, and they all expect one girl to be picked, and it ends up that the main character, who was not expected to be picked, is, and she's taken to the tower, and she learns about who he is and what he does to keep the forest at bay, and the magic that is used in that. And I really enjoyed it. It sort of felt a bit fairy tale-esque. There is a bit more to the plot than that, like it does, the setting does expand as the book goes on, but I really enjoyed the forest setting and how forest is like a persona for someone, and I really liked the characters and just everything about it. I have some more Naomi Novik books to read. I've got Temeraire on my TBR, so hopefully I enjoy that as much. I did read A Deadly Education and I found the writing style was very different between A Deadly Education and Uprooted and Spinning Silver. I feel as though they were written by a different author. So I'm very interested to see how Temeraire is, but yeah, would definitely recommend her standalones. I'd say they're very atmospheric. Like Spinning Silver is very wintry, so it definitely it's really cold and like the perfect book for winter. And I'd say Uprooted is, I guess, a bit more autumnal. Like they're very atmospheric reads. And then the final fantasy standalones that I would like to recommend today are Warbreaker and also Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. These are currently standalones, and they do definitely work as standalones. I know Brandon Sanderson is planning to expand upon these, but he hasn't got to them yet, and they definitely wrap up as a standalone. These are so fun. Like I love Brandon Sanderson. Like everything he's written that I've read, I've really enjoyed. And so I think I preferred Warbreaker to Elantris, but I would have to reread them both to like compare them, because I read Elantris so many years ago now. Elantris, you are following, there's a few characters, but it's a story about sisters. There are two kingdoms, and the king of one of them has proposed one of his daughters to the king of the other, and at the beginning of the book he changes his mind and sends his other daughter to go in her stead. And so one of the daughters has been preparing all her life for this. She has trained for it, and suddenly she's had it taken away from her, and the other daughter, who wasn't prepared for it, is suddenly like, oh, okay, what is going on? And so she's going in her stead to this kingdom, and in this kingdom colours have power and magic, and the people that rule in this kingdom are like the dead. Like some of the dead are reborn, and people give it's a complex magic system to try and explain, but like people's breath is what they call, it's like their colour, and so they will give these to the gods, and then they become like drab and grey. And so people want more and more colour because the colours give them the ability to have magic and be able to see the world more clearly. And so the magic system is so interesting, and humans can have breaths given to them as well, have that power. But there's like this concept with like the gods questioning, or one of the characters that we follow is a god, and he is questioning like what this power is and why he's alive and why he came back to be this god, and what it means to be godlike, and what it means to have these powers, and why are people so obsessed with giving them their breaths, and the sort of the concept that breaths are given and the trading of this power. I loved the relationship with the sisters because you follow both of them. I really enjoyed the god character. I really enjoyed the inanimate object in this, which is a talking sword called Nightblood, which just wants to kill everyone. So I very much enjoyed this. I mean, everything Brandon Sanderson does is perfect. If you're interested in getting into Brandon Sanderson, then I'd say Warbreaker is a very good place to start. I started with the Final Empire and the Mistborn series, but this is really, really good. So those are my favourite fantasy standalones. I hope I've given you some recommendations. I feel as though a lot of these books are quite popular and are already talked about, but hopefully I've been able to put one on your wish list. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!